Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Hope on the Inside by Marie Bostwick, read by Hilary Huber. Chapter 1. On most days, Hope Carpenter was early to rouse but slow to rise. It was a habit she had developed while a young and happily harried mother of 4, including one set of twins, with a to-do list that would have required a twin of her own to complete. Setting her alarm to go off before the rest of the family stirred, Hope woke before dawn and lingered in the cocoon of covers for 15 minutes, relishing the luxury of stillness and unstructured time. Even now, with her children grown and gone, she still cherished those few precious pre-dawn moments of peace and quiet. When her cell phone began to hum on a Friday in November that seemed like any other, Hope stirred and stretched in the dark before shutting off the alarm. Careful not to waken Rick, she plumped her pillow, smiling to herself when she caught the scent of lavender. Hope was acutely sensitive to smells. If somebody walked into her home wearing perfume, she could name not only the brand, but also the various flowers, herbs, or oils in the blend. It was kind of her party trick, that and being able to touch her nose with her tongue, which her kids always found far more impressive. But beyond the novelty of this admittedly weird talent, scents were very evocative for Hope, as they are for so many people, summoning up vivid memories and emotions. Whenever she smelled boxwood, she was instantly brought back to her grandmother's tidy garden where she played hide-and-seek with her little sister Hazel. Breathing in boxwood, Hope could see herself, counting to 10, then opening her eyes and pretending she couldn't see Hazel crouching behind the hedges. When Hope smelled motor oil, she was suddenly sitting on the concrete floor of the garage, handing tools to her dad as he worked on his 1969 Boss 429 Mustang, the car he spent most of his adult life restoring. Orange peel took her back to her mother's kitchen. She could see herself standing on a stool next to the stove, peering into the bubbling pot as her mom stirred batches of the thick, fragrant marmalade she always gave as Christmas gifts. 34 years before, Hope had made her own wedding bouquet, white roses, dusty miller, and fragrant French lavender. Moments before the church doors opened and the entrance music began to play, she was hit by a sudden jolt of nerves. Was she ready to be a wife? Taking a deep breath, she smelled lavender and felt suddenly brave and sure. Ever since, Hope believed that lavender imparted courage. That was why she sprinkled a little lavender oil on her pillow each night. It helped her sleep peacefully and embrace the day to come. Most scents summoned up happy memories for Hope, remembrances of good times and good feelings, but not always. The hospice where her mother died had an herb garden near the entrance with a huge and redolent rosemary bush. An avid and skilled cook, Hope enjoyed the scent of most fresh herbs. But since her mother's death, just 5 months after Hope's 21st birthday, Hope associated the smell of rosemary with ominous news. Though Hope was wide awake, and Rick was beginning to stir on that early Friday morning, the sun still wasn't up when the phone rang. Reed, born 17 minutes after his twin brother Rory, was calling from Philadelphia. He'd just been offered a full professorship in the English department and was so excited to share the news that he forgot about the 3-hour time zone difference between Oregon and Pennsylvania. 5 minutes after Reed hung up, Mackenzie phoned. She and Zach had just landed in Seattle, returning from their Hawaiian honeymoon. As usual, Mackenzie had dialed Rick's cell phone, but Hope, who was getting dressed for work by then, eavesdropped on the conversation. When Rick said, "Yes, kitten, she's right here. Hang on," Hope was surprised. Usually, Rick had to prompt their only daughter to talk with her. That day, Mackenzie was eager to talk to her, sounding truly happy, almost giddy. Mackenzie chattered away about how she and Zach had hiked through a rainforest and had a romantic candlelit dinner on the beach. It was a lovely talk, gossipy, cozy, and close, the sort of easy conversation Hope always wanted to have with her daughter, but rarely did. It wasn't because Mackenzie disliked her. Hope understood that. She just liked Rick more. Always had. But that day was different. Mackenzie, who never sought her mother's advice about anything, asked Hope to email her famous goulash recipe. "Not the noodles," Mackenzie clarified. "Just the sauce. I'll put it over macaroni." "Sure, that'll work," Hope said, even though she thought that serving the sauce over thick, chewy homemade noodles was what made the dish so good. But she held her tongue, not wanting to say anything to spoil this all-too-rare moment of mother-daughter bonding. It was so good to hear Mackenzie sounding so happy. Zach seemed to have turned out to be the right man for her after all. After Mackenzie's 2 broken engagements, Hope could be forgiven for having dragged her feet when it came to making wedding arrangements. She'd begun to doubt that any man could ever measure up to Rick in Mackenzie's eyes. When Hope finally realized her daughter was serious, she kicked into high gear. She oversaw the menus, found a good price on the lobster that Mackenzie insisted upon, hand-calligraphed place cards, tracked and organized hotel reservations, and stayed up past midnight every night for a month, stitching and stuffing 120 heart-shaped monogrammed sachets, filled with homegrown lavender, as favors for each of the wedding guests. Mackenzie thought that part was ridiculous. She said that nobody would care if there were favors or not. Maybe they wouldn't, but Hope thought those little details mattered. Besides, she was having fun. Hope arranged all the flowers, too, including Mackenzie's fall-themed bouquet of mums and carefully preserved leaves. She had wanted to sew the wedding dress as well, but Mackenzie was dead set on wearing Vera Wang. Hope's mother had been an excellent seamstress. She'd often talked about making wedding dresses for Hope and Hazel when they grew up. But by the time Hope was engaged, it was too late. Her mother was losing ground against the illnesses she'd battled for so long and no longer had the strength to sew. Instead, Hope made the gown, getting her mother's advice at various stages of construction. When it was finished, Hope brought the dress to her mother's room and sat down on the bed while she and her mom stitched the hem of the huge, flouncy skirt. It was the 80s. Every bride wanted to look like Princess Diana. Working from opposite ends and meeting in the middle. As they sewed, Hope's mother imparted every piece of marital advice in her arsenal, barely pausing between subjects, as if she had rehearsed it all in her mind beforehand. It was a long talk. At the end of it, she took Hope's hands in her bony grasp and said, "Make up your mind to be happy, Hope. Whatever comes your way, find the happiness in it. That's the real trick of life." 34 years later, Hope still tried to follow that advice. The conversation with Mackenzie went so long that Hope was nearly late to work, sprinting from the faculty parking lot and through the door of the high school just 3 minutes before the first bell. After a nearly 3-decade hiatus to raise her children, this was only Hope's 2nd year back in teaching. Things had changed a lot in that time. For one thing, home ec was now called FACS, Family and Consumer Science, and the curriculum was completely transformed. It wasn't enough to teach kids how to sew an apron or make a meatloaf anymore. Lesson plans were far more complicated and had to be structured around skills that connected across the curriculum. For example, the apron project Hope used to teach sewing might be designed on a computer to reinforce what students were learning in the tech program. Meatloaf making might be accompanied by a research project on nutritional value and ingredient sources to support what they were learning in health or environmental science classes. These were changes for the better, in Hope's opinion, and made the coursework more relevant to modern life. But it didn't make Hope's life easy. During her first year back in the classroom, she often felt overwhelmed. Staying one step ahead of her students required her to burn a lot of midnight oil. But now, 3 months into her 2nd year, Hope felt like she had a handle on things. The glowing review she had received from her principal that day confirmed it. She tried calling Rick to share the good news, but he didn't answer his office phone. However, since it was Friday, she got to tell Hazel all about it when the sisters met at Café Provence for happy hour. "It's funny, isn't it?" Hope said, taking the last piece of cheese. "What is?" Hazel said, burrowing through her purse in search of her wallet. "How things work out. I only went back to teaching because Liam surprised us all and got into film school at UCLA. If we hadn't needed the extra money for his tuition, I might have quit after the first month. But now, I love it. I really do." "Why do you sound so surprised? You're a natural-born teacher. I mean, you raised 4 amazing kids. Well, 5 if you count me." Hazel grinned. "What's motherhood besides a 2-decade-long teaching gig?" "Oh, it's way longer than that," Hope said, reaching for her own wallet. "Doesn't matter how old your kids get, you never stop being a mom." When the waitress approached with the check, Hope nipped it quickly from the folder, earning an exasperated look from her sister. "Come on," Hazel said. "At least let's split it." Hope gave the waitress a stern look. "Trust me, you don't want my sister's money. She's a well-known counterfeiter." The waitress laughed and thanked Hope for the warning, then thanked her again when Hope said she could keep the change. Hope and Hazel got up from the table. "You should have let me get that," Hazel said. "It was my turn." You got it last week. Besides, I've been sitting here and chattering about me for the last hour. How are things with you? How's business?" Hope held the door open, then followed Hazel outside onto the sidewalk. It was chilly, gray, and wet, typical for early November in Oregon. The blue and white striped awning over the door dripped a steady curtain of droplets onto the sidewalk. "You know that listing we had on the lake?" Hazel asked, looking down at her phone as she scanned through her text messages. "The huge one with the flagstone terraces and the boathouse? Well, we're set to close next week and—" Hazel stopped short, frowning. "Oh, no. Jinxed it. Hang on, sis. I need to call the office." Hazel punched a number into the phone, switching to her all-business voice when her assistant answered. "Linda? Uh-huh. Don't worry about it. I was about to head back to the office anyway. Just tell me what happened." Hope stood there for a moment, not sure if she should stay or go. When Hazel said, "We are not going to lose a $2 million transaction because Stan failed to read the contract. Put him on," Hope realized she was going to be a while. If Hope had to sum up her sister in 3 words, they would be loyal, honest, sometimes to a fault, and single-minded. And not just about business. Hazel did one thing at a time and wholeheartedly. Only 28 years after closing her first real estate deal on a charming but cavernous Victorian with a roof that leaked and plumbing that functioned only intermittently, a fixer-upper that Rick and Hope were still fixing up, Hope was the owner of Hazelnut Realty, with 50 employees and 3 offices, soon to be 4. Hope loved that name, Hazelnut Realty. At first glance, it seemed like a nod to the region. 99% of the U.S. hazelnut crop is grown in Oregon, but Hope knew it was her sister's idea of a joke. Hazel took her business seriously, but not herself, which was one of the many things Hope loved about her sister. Hope glanced at her watch, then squeezed Hazel's shoulder in farewell. Hazel made an apologetic face, mouthed goodbye, and went back to her call. Hope stopped by the market to pick up ingredients for goulash, thinking it would be nice to surprise Rick. Between work and the wedding, they'd been eating a lot of pizza and take-out Thai lately. Not that Rick had complained. He'd been working so late every night that he hardly noticed what he ate. It had been that way for months, ever since his engineering firm had been bought by another larger firm. But when Hope got home, she was surprised to see Rick's car was already in the garage. It had been months since he'd left the office early. Rick kept telling her that his crushing work schedule was just temporary, that things would settle down once people quit feeling like they had to outdo one another, improving themselves to the new management. Maybe his prediction had finally come true? If so, It really had been a good day for both of them. Hope took the groceries out of the trunk and carried them to the house, humming a happy tune. But that was before Hope opened the door, sniffed the air, and felt her stomach clench like a fist. Rosemary. Chapter 2. Rick Carpenter stood 6'4" and weighed 220 pounds. He had deep blue eyes, short gray hair that matched his full gray beard, and shoulders so muscular that it was hard to find shirts to fit him. He had played for the Old Boars, the senior division of the Portland Rugby Club, into his early 50s. Even now, at age 58, he looked like he could kick the butts of guys half his age. Rugby is a little like football, but much rougher. Players eschew helmets and pads and consider injuries a badge of honor. Rick inherited his love of the game from his dad, an Irish dock worker turned welder who emigrated at the age of 20 with a chip on his shoulder and $90 in his pocket, and died from complications of an industrial accident when Rick was just 14. His deceased father loomed large in his life. Rick was the stubborn son of a stubborn man. A man whose boyhood had been cut short and who had pulled himself up by the bootstraps, as his dad had done before him. But the influence of Rick's mother, Ruth, was also strongly in evidence. Ruth showed him he could be smart as well as tough. She instilled in him a reverence for education and a belief that hard work would not go unrewarded. And when Rick's hair-trigger temper started getting him into fights at school, Ruth taught him to bake. It was just what he needed. Whereas other men might handle anxiety by pounding a speed bag at the gym or heading to the nearest bar in search of a drink and a fist fight, Rick vented his pent-up emotions by pounding his frustrations into a mound of warm bread dough. In addition to life lessons, Ruth passed all her baking secrets and recipes on to her only son. Rosemary olive loaf, however, was Rick's own creation, something he baked only sporadically. When Rick got home that day, around noon, he'd gone directly into the kitchen, practically tearing off his jacket and tie before putting an apron on over his dress shirt. He went directly to work, furiously chopping olives and rosemary before mixing it into the sticky dough, kneading it a good 15 minutes. By then, he'd calmed down enough to be able to think. After washing his hands and pouring a neat scotch, he sat down and did exactly that for the 2 hours it took the bread to rise. By the time he'd punched down the dough, kneaded it a second time, he had formulated a plan and felt much better. The only thing he had to do now was deal with Hope. She'd be upset at first, like he'd been, but Hope was nothing if not sensible and optimistic. Once she got past the emotional part, she'd realize that nothing had changed. He just had to break the news gently. "Hey," Rick said, giving her a peck on the cheek before lifting the hot loaves from the baking pans to a cooling rack. "Got home early and thought I'd surprise you. Don't they smell great?" He bent down and took a deep, appreciative sniff of the hot bread before lifting his head. In spite of his explanation, Hope still looked surprised. No, he thought, not surprised, concerned. Her expression matched the one she wore whenever they watched one of those spy movies that he loved and she tolerated, as though she wanted to put her hands to her face and peek through her fingers. She was carrying a grocery bag in one arm and clutching the neck of a wine bottle in her hand. "Looks like a good vintage," he said, nodding toward the bottle. "Doesn't even have a screw top." "What's wrong?" Hope asked, ignoring his grin. "Nothing." Hope shook her head. "Something's happened. What is it? Something with the kids? Did Mackenzie call?" "Nobody called," he said, opening a drawer and searching for a corkscrew. "And nothing's wrong. Why would you think that?" "You only make rosemary olive bread when something's gone wrong, and you're trying to break it to me gently." Hope looked toward the cooling rack and stabbed the air with an accusatory gesture, like a character in a courtroom drama who's been asked to identify the culprit. "That is bread for making the best of a bad situation," she said. "Hope, it's only bread. Nothing's wrong, really." Rick twisted the metal coil into the cork, avoiding her eyes. "There is—" he paused. "A situation, but it's not bad," he said quickly, as he took 2 wine glasses from the cabinet. "In fact, it's good. I'm retiring." "What?" Hope's jaw went slack. She stood there for a moment, staring incredulously. "Retiring? What are you talking about? You're only 58 years old. You love being an engineer." Rick tipped the bottle and poured wine into the first glass, watching the purplish liquid climb toward the rim. He did love being an engineer, and he'd worked harder than anyone he knew in order to become one. When they first married, Hope was still teaching, supporting them both so he could go to school full-time. Then the twins came. For 7 years, Rick worked construction during the day, all day, studied and went to class nights and weekends. When he finally finished, Hope, Hazel, Rory, and Reed, 2-year-old Mackenzie, who already had him wrapped around her little finger, and his mother were all there to see him receive his diploma. Ruth said it was the proudest moment of her life. Rick's proudest day came 2 weeks later, when he threw away his worn-out work boots, putting on a brand-new suit for his first day of work as an engineer. His second proudest day was every one after that, every day he spent working. He did love being an engineer. He loved taking a project from plan to completion, solving problems before they occurred, working in a team, visiting the job site, seeing foundations poured, scaffolds rise, and buildings climb floor after floor until they really did scrape the sky. He loved putting his stamp on the city of his birth, seeing his imprint on Portland's skyline. And now he was retiring? No wonder Hope didn't believe his story. The doubt in her voice made him angry, because it made him doubt himself. "You mean—" She hesitated a moment. "You mean they fired you?" "No," he said, and handed her some wine, his movement so abrupt that a little of the liquid splashed over the rim. "They did not fire me. They offered an early retirement package to me and a few of the other senior engineers." He poured another glass for himself and took a long draught. "And I thought, after 28 years, what the hell? So I decided to take it." Hope's eyes flashed, sparking with that blue flame he knew so well and usually found attractive. But not tonight. "You decided?" she snapped. "Without even discussing it with me? Haven't we talked about this?" They had, more than once. The last time was when Hope came home from a sister's weekend with Hazel and found a brand-new SUV parked in the driveway. The argument that ensued was heated. They kept the car, but later, when they were in bed, Rick swore it would never happen again. "We had a deal. You said you wouldn't make any big decisions without—" "I didn't decide. They decided for me, all right?" Rick roared, the fury and frustration in his face and voice silencing her. "They decided. Are you happy now?" Hope stood silent. Rick knocked back his wine, gulping it down without tasting it, trying to swallow back the catch in his throat. "These people are vultures," he said, when he felt he could trust his voice. "They don't have any loyalty. They don't care about the years I spent building the company. They gave me 2 options, retire early with severance or wait to be fired." He put down his glass. What else was I supposed to do? The anger in Hope's eyes melted. She laid her hand over his. "Babe, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said, his throat still tight. "Glad to be out of there. It's been miserable since the buyout. It has, Hope agreed. You've practically been killing yourself. Yeah, well, not anymore. He topped up his glass and tilted it in her direction. Hope touched the rim of her glass to his, returning his smile. Somehow Rick felt renewed and forgiven. "What would you say to Christmas in Hawaii?" he asked. "Hawaii?" Hope said, laughing a little. "This doesn't seem like quite the time for vacation, does it?" "It's the perfect time. Mackenzie and Zach are planning to spend Christmas with his parents. Rory and Reed will both be too wrapped up with work to make it out here this year, but we can bring Liam along. He'd love it. Wouldn't you rather spend Christmas under a palm tree than pining for your absent fledglings? The timing is ideal. You'll have a break from school, and for the first time in forever, my calendar is totally open." Hope smiled. A real vacation? No interruptions or emails? No calls from the office? Very tempting. What about Hazel? We can't desert her over the holiday. "Tell her to come along," Rick said. "The more the merrier. We'll bring Mom, too. I'll look for a condo we can rent, someplace we can stretch out a little." "Well, okay, let's do it," Hope said, her face splitting into a grin, but only briefly. "Assuming you haven't found another job by then." She sipped her wine. "You're not really planning on retiring, are you?" "Of course not." Rick took a serrated knife from the block and sliced into one of the loaves. The crumb was tender, but the crust was crisp, cracking under the pressure of his knife and releasing a rich, mouth-watering perfume of rosemary and olives into the air. He cut off 2 slices, smiling at a job well done. "Don't worry," he said. "I have a plan. I'm going to spend the next few weeks working on the house, knocking off the stuff that's been on my honey-do list for the last couple of years. Thought I'd start replacing the roof on the sun porch." "Really?" Hope said, her face lighting up. The number of years she'd been asking him to get to that was closer to 5 than 2. "Really? Then we'll fly to Maui for an amazing Christmas before I come home and start sending out resumes." "But," Hope said slowly, "are you sure you want to wait that long?" Rick took a stick of butter from the refrigerator and started slathering it onto the hot bread. "Nobody will be hiring until January. I might as well take a little time off while I can." He handed her a piece of the bread, still warm and dripping with butter. Hope took it, sniffed it, but didn't taste it. "Honey, we're fine," he said, seeing the wheels turn behind her eyes. The 2 of them had grown up poor and stayed poor for a long time. Pinching pennies was a hard habit to break, harder for Hope than Rick. He wished she'd worry about money a little less and trust him a little more. "Really, the package they offered me is pretty decent. Not lavish, but not bad. It won't take long for me to find another job, you'll see. After all, who was the brilliant man who led the team on the bridge repair and the waterfront reclamation project, who engineered half the buildings in downtown Portland?" "Let me think," Hope said, giving him a lopsided smile. "Was it you?" "Damn straight it was." Hope laughed and bit into the bread. Rick did the same and groaned with pleasure. It was delicious, the best he'd ever made. This seemed like a harbinger of good things to come. "I'll find a new job by Valentine's Day. St. Patrick's at the latest," Rick declared. "Then we'll bank the severance, or maybe pay off the second mortgage we had to take out for Liam's tuition." Hope's eyes widened a bit. "Do you really think we could? That'd be wonderful, wouldn't it?" He nodded, thinking how beautiful she was and what a good team they made. He was nothing when they met, a part-time student and full-time drywall contractor. He'd made a full-court press to win her, giving her the hard sell, explaining that someday he would become the kind of man she deserved. With Hope by his side, it had happened. They had a beautiful home, beautiful family, beautiful life. Rick took care of the finances, and Hope took care of the house and him, and the kids, and pretty much everybody who crossed her path, mothering every kid in a 6-block radius. Rick was proud of her and the life they'd built. Sure, they had their moments.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?